All right, so today I'm going to be talking about the Maps API for Flash and just kind of some general Flash Flex stuff to get you, started using our API. So my name is Pamelafox. I'm the support engineer for the Maps API. So that includes like the JavaScript Maps API, the normal Maps API, the Maplets API, static Maps API, etc. So my job is to do articles, sample code, help out in the groups, etc. All right, so we're going to start off with an intro to Flex because a lot of people ask like what that is. And let me start off by prefacing and giving you a little background on my experience. So I started off using like Flash way back when, when I was in high school or middle school or whatever. And I was actually, the kind of person that helped people make websites in Flash. And they were really cute websites. I made one for like this trucking club, and they were all a bunch of people who owned trucks, and it had a little intro that had a truck that would go and drive off and become the logo. The kind of thing that works great in Flash. So I actually started off using Flash for creating websites. I went on to do like an animation miner, so I used Flash to create animations. So I actually used Flash from kind of both an animator and programmer point of view. So that was like high school, start of college. And then I came here, and my job was primarily the JavaScript Maps API. So I went heavy into JavaScript for 2 years. And now we came up with the Maps API for Flash. So I've kind of been thrown back into Flash, but now it's all completely different because it's Flex, it's Actionscript 3. So I'm coming at it from the point of view of somebody who used to use Flash, then did JavaScript, and then got thrown into Flex and AS3. So this is kind of my impression of it based on that experience. All right, so I was talking about Flash. I started off in Flash and moved on to using Flex for the new API. So Flash and Flex are actually, Flex you can think of as a development framework, but it's also an IDE, and that's what we're looking at here. And the IDE kind of helps us visualize the differences here. So this is the Flash CS3. And you can see you have like a stage, you have a ruler, you actually have scenes, and then you have like sub-objects in the scenes. Then you have like layers in the scenes, and then you have this timeline. And the timeline is where you get the animation from. And then where you bring in the programming is if you see like there's little A's over here, that actually stands for actions. So you can have actions associated with an object, actions associated with a particular frame in the timeline. So Flash was designed for animators, but programmers could use it in order to create games, websites, even to create rich internet applications. But it was kind of a hack. Like if you look at a lot of the code to create that kind of stuff, it's usually messy. So this is Flash, and then we have Flex. So Flex looks like your standard IDE, right? You have, these are a bunch of the classes I'm working on. Here I've got my source code with my syntax highlighting. This is actually an outline of Flex components. So Flex is more component and event-based. So you get to set up a bunch of components and then use Actionscript 3 to manipulate those components and for the components to interact with each other via events, right? So you can tell from the IDE that you can see this whole component breakdown here, very component-based. And developer-based, since the focus here is the actual code. Here you can go into a code mode, but your default view is this. So that's Flash versus Flex. Yeah, because I went there.
So there is a design mode over in Flex?
Yeah, there is. I discovered that this morning. So the design mode is to help you visually lay out your components. But there's still a difference between... Ryan was pointing out that there is a design mode in Flex, and so that does look a bit more like this, but you still don't have a timeline. It's still component based versus this kind of timeline animation based.
So is the idea you use one tool or the other? Not if you don't have
well, the idea is this: if your goal is to create like an application, you use Flex, right? Flex is designed to, it comes up with all these UI components because applications are components that interact with each other, right? So Flex is designed around these components and using the Actionscript 3 to make these components work together. So if you want to create an application, use Flex. If you want to create like an animation or a website that has some amount of like minimal interaction, then you'd use Flash. So like I used it to make a game which had a lot of animations in it. If I was going to do it now, I'd probably just end up using Flex because it's much cleaner to develop in. Basically, as a developer, you should use Flex now. If you try to use Flash as a developer, you're going to realize like there's all this stuff that's designed for animators that could confuse you. OK, so this is what Flex development looks like. We use Mxml, which I'll talk about in a second. It's an XML markup language. We use that to lay out the application and all the components. We use Actionscript 3 to define how the components are going to interact with each other and do anything additional if we want to create some graphics, whatever. Then we use Flex Builder or the compiler to turn this into a Swift file. And then we embed the Swift in HTML or even make like an Air application. All right, so Mxml. It's an XML-based markup language that we use to lay out the components for Flex apps. It's like HTML, but it's basically like if HTML and JavaScript had been designed from the beginning with like their interaction in mind. Because right now they're kind of hobbled together, via like the DOM model and stuff like this. But Mxml is designed to work perfectly with ActionScript 3. So it's got like a consistent syntax and like a huge set of tags for visual components, and it works perfectly with ActionScript 3. So like in MXML, like I'll give something an ID. This ID then becomes like a global variable in my app. I don't even have to do like a document like an element by ID. So it's instantly available for me to use. And then we have like a consistent like model for getting events from these MXML components. So it's basically like what HTML would look like if it knew from the beginning that all this JavaScript stuff would have come along. So there's tons of really cool components. And the best way to see them all is we go to the Flex 3 Style Explorer. This is one of my favorite places to go because it's really pretty. OK, so here you can see a lot of the components. Data grid. I mean, granted, like, so you can think about this is kind of like when you're using a JavaScript library like Scriptaculous, and it has lots of components. But this is all stuff that's built into Flex. So it's really easy to use, like a color picker, progress bar, tooltip, sliders. And you can see like there's tons of different styling options. And then you can even do some styling with CSS as well. Scroll bars, horizontal rules, accordion navigator, tab navigator. Always got to have tabs. All these form elements, different types of lists, the tree list. You have to have a tree list, right? And then different containers. If you used to like Swing apps or something like that, these are just ways to. You can have a panel that has a H divided box inside of it, and then that can have some components inside of that. So the containers are for doing like your general layout, and then you can put the components inside of those. Buttons, etc. So these are all the components that come built in with Flex, but you can also, if you want it, create your own components. But you often find that almost everything you want to do, you can do with one of these components. Or you'll kind of modify your UI to fit these components so that you don't have to make your own.
Does that generate the Mxml then from that?
This thing? No, it doesn't generate it. Usually what I do is I look here. And then so if I want an H slider, I'll just look up like H slider reference. And you see mx.controls.hslider. So this is that's how you know it's one of the Flex components. And this is just a brief demo here of the syntax. So hslider, and then I look at all the different properties I want. So hslider extends from slider, so most of the properties are actually under slider. So it shows off all of them here and all the defaults. So usually I'll look at this. So I'll look here. and then look up the actual reference, decide what I want to use, and figure out what properties I need to set, and check out the events. So usually subscribe to like the change event. And there's a couple other ones as well. All right, and they even have comments at the end of the docs, just in case. All right, so then we have Actionscript 3. So it's based on ECMAScript like JavaScript is, but a couple parts of it are based on more like advanced specifications of ECMAScript. And the advantage of one of the advantages of using it over AS2 is that they've got a new virtual machine to deal with it, and it can execute AS3 code up to 10 times faster than AS2 code. So if nothing else, that's one reason to port your code over from AS2 to AS3. But some highlights about the language is that it supports ECMAScript for XML style parsing. And I'll show you some examples of this later, because this is what I've been using heavily. The nickname for that is E4X, or the abbreviation. It has a standardized DOM event model based on the DOM3 event spec. We'll see that as well. So that means that your event listening is much cleaner and consistent. And it's easy to make like new components that trigger their own events. And then if you want to, you can type your variables, and then it'll actually type them at runtime, and so you'll get better performance and memory from that. So here's an example of how Mxml and AS3 work together. So I pared this down quite a bit. But so here we have a flex application, and then we have a horizontal slider. We give it an ID of zoom slider. Here I'm just saying the maximum value is 20. I'm giving it a width of 100%, and saying when it changes, so this is the change event, we're going to trigger this function and pass in the event. So then when you go down to the MX script, and so in between here is where we have all of our Actionscript 3. We have this function on slider changed, gets passed an event. I don't actually use the event. What I do is say, I'm going to set the zoom of my map to the zoom slider.value. So all of these properties that you set here, you can later retrieve down here. So I'll show you that demo, actually just live. Okay, so here we have the slider. You can see it's taking up the whole width. I set the maximum. Actually, I did some code to set the maximum dynamically based on the maximum zoom level of the map. Very max is 20. So here we can change it. We'll set the zoom level. Here's a little cool trick: is that a lot of developers, when they're using Flex Builder and making like example applications, they'll compile their applications with view source enabled. So whenever you're looking at a cool demo and you're curious to see the source, right-click and see if you can find this little view source thing right here. So when you click on that, if they've enabled that, you'll get to code this thing, and that'll just show you all the source. And it even make it easy to download, so I can download the source as a zip file, and there's a quick link to the Flex SDK. So this is really cool, and for the Flash API, we've compiled all of our demos with this option, so that it makes it really easy. Because otherwise, you ended up having to say like, okay, and here's all the various like source files that make up this example. It's much easier here because it'll bundle it all together for you. So you can actually look at this whole the whole example here. So we have the application. I used a panel and a VBox and then even an HBox to lay out the components. And then I have the horizontal slider. Yeah, I can Control+. You can see the change event. So here we have a map that's going to go in the UI component. I'm importing a bunch of map stuff and a few other things. And so when the UI component is created, that's going to hold the map. I create a new map. And then when that map is ready, I do some stuff, enable some zooms, set the center of the map. And then I also set the maximum of the zoom slider to the maximum resolution of the current map area. So that's why you saw it actually went to 17 instead of 20. And here's the function we saw before. When the slider changed, I actually checked to see if the map's been loaded, and if so, set the zoom to the current value of the slider. So that's the full code for that example, and that's kind of the basics of how Mxml and AS3 work together, is that you create the Mxml component, give an ID, assign some events, and then in your Actionscript, you can respond to those events. All right, so once you've actually created your application, you have two options for compiling it. One of them is that you can just download the open source Flex SDK, and it comes with all the necessary base Flex classes you need, like all those components, and it also comes with a command line compiler. So this is if you'd install it at Flex SDK, you would just run Flex SDK bin Mxmlc. This is the Mxml compiler, and then pass in the name of your Mxml file. So the advantage of this is that it's free. So anyone can get started using this. And this is what I used when we first came out with the Flash Maps API, since I didn't have this other option. So the other option is Flex Builder, and that's the IDE that I've been showing you. And that's pretty cool because it's an IDE. It does real-time error checking. It gives you a WYSIWYG design mode for laying out the components, which I only discovered this morning, so I've been doing it all manually. It'll do code refactoring for you, stuff like that. It's basically a full IDE. However, that means it costs money. So it's $200, but that's still not that expensive if you're going to be doing a lot of Flex work. All right, so that's basically Flex. So let's go into the Maps API for Flash. First of all, we launched the Maps API for Flash in March of this year. And the reason we launched it was because there were just so many people that there was probably 20 different unofficial Google Maps APIs in Flash because so many people wanted to be able to use Google Map tiles and the Google Maps experience from within Flash that they were just constantly rewriting it. But all of those things were against our terms of service because you're not allowed to use the tiles unless it's from within our APIs. So we wanted to encourage people to do these really cool Flash Maps applications, but in a legal way. So we had to come up with our own official Maps API for Flash. So it lets you write code in AS3 and Mxml, compile it against our interface library and output a SWIFT, and then you can embed the SWIFT in your web page, Google Earth, wherever. It actually doesn't support AIR yet. That's the #1 feature request, is to get it so that the SWIFTs work as AIR applications. There's some technical reasons why that doesn't work yet. All right, so let's do a live demo. So the first thing you would do is download our SDK. So if you went to our homepage, you just click on this little link, download the Google Maps API for Flash SDK. That comes with basically the documentation and the interface library. And the interface library is this SWIC file, SWC. And I have it, here's a download here. So this is and you can see this is so our current version is 1.5. So we need that SWIC file in order to compile against. So let's see. I think I've got it on the desktop too. All right, cool. So I've got it dragged to the desktop. So the next thing I do is go to Flex Builder, and I'll say I want to do a new Flex project. Project name is Hello World Live Demo. It's a web application, so we don't support AIR. And very good. Let's create it. All right. We're going to add the SWIC to the libs so that it can compile against that. All right, and finish. OK, so it gave me this base application. However, what I'm going to do is just go to the documentation and copy and paste something. Let's go to basics. All right, so here's our basic application. Let's take this. That's Flash, not Flex. OK. And let's see, some compile time errors. Those are in my other things. All right, cool. Yep, so this one's all set. So now what I can do is go to the little run button, tell it to run this. It decides to do some stuff in the background. Okay. So this is going to open up Firefox, and hopefully it worked. Okay. Right. So classic problem, didn't specify an API key. If you're familiar with the Maps APIs, you know that we always require a key. And it's really annoying, but it has to be done because of our contracts with our data providers. So now I'm going to go and say, shoot, got to sign up for a key. I'll just give it my personal domain. Let's grab the key and go back to Flex. And I can actually just do this right here, map.key equals. You can also pass it in through the flash bars in your HTML if you want to. So you have a couple different ways of passing in the keys. That's kind of cool. It makes it a little easier to use. So now let's reload and see how it worked. OK, cool. So it was working now. You'll notice it actually says debug mode. This is because it knows that it's running off the file system. Since our terms of service say that you have to create use these inside public websites, we put this debug mode on top of the tiles if you're running it from the file system. Some of the developers think that's kind of annoying, but terms of service are what they are. So such is life. All right, so that was basically Hello World. The code was really basic. Just had that UI component, created the map. When the map was ready, I just set the center of the map. All right. So features, the Maps API for Flash hasn't caught up with the JavaScript Maps API yet, since the JavaScript Maps API has been around for 3 years now. We just had a birthday. So it's very full featured, right? The Maps API for Flash is young, so it has some catching up to do. But the advantage, it's actually going to be able to catch up a lot faster because the Maps API for Flash is its own code base, and the only thing that it outputs is the Maps API for Flash. The JavaScript Maps API is a subset of the code base that powers Google Maps. So anytime we make a change to the JavaScript Maps API, we're actually making a change to Google Maps. So because of that, we can't iterate as quickly in the JavaScript Maps API. We have to be very careful not to break Google Maps, as it has quite a few users. So the Maps API for Flash right now, we have events, we have all the standard controls. We've got overlays, markers, polys, info windows, ground overlays, tile layers. The only service we have is geocoding. Driving directions is the number 3 feature request right now. And it looks like we're going to support that in 1.6 or 1.7. So the only service right now we have is geocoding, since that's kind of the essential service. And then we also have some interfaces. So right now you can extend control and you can extend tile layer. You actually can't quite extend overlay yet, so we're working on that as well. And then another thing we have, which is different from the JavaScript Maps API, is that a lot of our controls and markers and info windows have styles associated with them and style objects you can set. Since styling is something that's uniquely important to Flex developers, like if you noticed in that Flex 3 Style Explorer, there were so many different styles that we could set for a particular control. So styling is really important to Flex developers. So because of that, you'll notice that we have tons of different styles for all of our overlays and controls. Like you can actually make a gradient poly on the map, which is pretty cool. That you can actually do. I don't know why you would do it, right? Like why do you actually need a gradient poly? But I mean, the funny thing is that the Flex developers, they've already asked for the ability to do a poly that's filled in with hashes, or what do you call it? Yeah, hatch strokes and stuff like that. So I can't explain why these people want these styles, but they want them. It's very flashy. So I'll do a little demo of some of the styles. Let's see, polygon. All right, so here's our polygon options demo. So you can do fill style and stroke style, and then you can do this gradient, and the gradient has all of these sub options. So let's turn on the gradient, and we'll keep the default options because they're pretty good. And so now I've got this crazy gradient poly on the map. So technically completely unnecessary, but I'm sure there's somebody out there that's using this right now. And there's somebody else who wants their hash style, so yeah. All right, so let's go into some reasons why you'd use the Maps API for Flash. One of the primary reasons is if you already have a website that's in Flash, it's easier to integrate a Flash map than a JavaScript map. It actually is possible to integrate a JavaScript map because you can communicate between Flash and JavaScript, but it's much easier to embed a Flash map. So we'll look at this example.
So,
Yeah.
on the gradient thing, though, does that have to be a feature of Maps, or is that just a feature of Flash that?
This is just a feature of Flash that we're taking advantage of. So Ryan asked about the gradient feature, if that has to be a feature of Maps. But it's really just a feature of Flash. So the only thing you're seeing here that's coming from Maps are the tiles and the copyrights. Everything else has been written in Flash. So because of that, because all of our polys are just written using the native Flash, vector drawing code, we can do anything that you would be able to do normally when you're drawing vectors in Flash. So because it's really easy to fill in a vector shape with a gradient in Flash, we can then support that in polys. All right, let's see. All right, so this is an example of a panorama viewing site. They were using QuickTime VR before, but then they moved to this Flash viewer. So Flash is a great way to view panoramas. It's very smooth. So I can go, you can imagine that you wouldn't want to write this in JavaScript. I mean, you could, because people do crazy things. But it certainly works much better in Flash. So this is all done in Flash, right? Now you can see they've integrated this little Google map on the bottom, and I can actually increase this if I want. And they have a little marker that has a beacon coming out of it, and the beacon indicates what we're looking at now. So this is pretty cool because then I can go and I can actually see that this is the building that we're looking at right now. So they were really happy when the Flash API came out. They actually made this a week after the API came out. So it was really easy for them to integrate. Another example that I won't show because it requires a login, but NavX was basically sites for doing GPS tracks. And they were already using our JavaScript Maps API, but they were using Flex in order to do a really rich UI around it. So we listed them we made them a trusted tester for our Flash API, and they converted from the JavaScript, using the JavaScript API to the Flash API in just a week. And that was before we even had the real version of the Flash API out, so it was changing every 3 days. So it's pretty impressive that they were actually able to do that. So now it's great because instead of having a Flex site with the JavaScript API embedded, they have a full Flex Flash site, so they're only relying on one technology for their site. So you may argue that, yeah, maybe they shouldn't do their UI in Flex and they shouldn't have a website that's all based on Flex, but it's a pretty slick interface, so I can understand why people use it. So another reason why you might use it is just for smoother video and animation. I mean, Flash was designed from the beginning to be good at animation, and obviously we use Flash for our YouTube videos, so something you wouldn't want to write in JavaScript is the YouTube player. So because of that, it's great to use the Flash Maps API when you want to do something that involves smooth animation or smooth video. Yeah, that too. It's great not having to test in multiple browsers. I love it. So here's an example of a driving simulator. And this guy actually did write this originally with the JavaScript API. And ported it to the Flash API, and he ended up getting half the CPU usage and twice the speed. So he was happy. So you can see that's an immediate improvement. Let me try and play this. Okay. So all it is a driving simulator, and I can change the cars, and I can zoom out. You can see the car gets smaller. I can change the bus. Here, I can stop. There you go. So it's just a driving simulator. It's really simple, but a lot of people actually really like this example because I was getting Google alerts about it for like weeks after we blogged about it. I mean, you can imagine taking that and like combining it with Street View and then combining it with actual street data and actually doing like collisions and stuff like that. If you've ever actually tried to do animation in JavaScript, you can do it, but it gets choppy. Flash is a lot more reliable for that. Here's an example just using video. And here they're just syncing the video being displayed to what's on the map. And it'll go, I think it goes to Vegas next. So that's just an example of using video with it. All right, another reason, better vector graphics. So in the JavaScript Maps API, we have polygons, we have polylines. However, we now have 4 different ways that these are implemented, depending on your exact browser and browser configuration. So as of, well, I guess it would have been as of today, except we rolled back the push. But as of next week, we'll have 4 different ways. So one of them is SVG. Okay, so a couple of browsers support SVG, Firefox, Safari, et cetera. The other one is Canvas. That's kind of the same set of browsers, Firefox, Safari. The other one is VML, that's Internet Explorer. And our complete fallback is a graphics server where we'll literally render your polys into images and serve them as tiles, right? Since we know that images at least work in every single browser, okay? So we have these 4 different techniques, and we basically query the browser and see, okay, is Canvas supported? If so, use Canvas. If not, is SVG supported? Use SVG. If not, is VML supported? Use VML. If nothing else, just use the graphics server and render some things to tiles. So it means like our polys work, but they work kind of differently across different browsers. Sometimes you can get donut holes to show up, and other times you can't, depending on which version you're using. And so it makes debugging for us really annoying too, because we have all these different, whenever you port a polybug, you have to find out exactly what browser and OS they're using in order to figure out if it's something like depends on the implementation. So our code for it is super messy, complicated, and not pretty to look at. In the Flash API, our code for polys is like 5 lines long. Like our lead JS Maps API engineer got really depressed when he saw the code for the Flash Maps API polygons because it was just so simple. So the cool thing is that Flash supports vector drawing natively. Like this is something that it's really good at. So because of that, like the code's really clean, but also your performance is consistent. So in every browser, you know that you're going to get the exact same performance for loading in like vector graphics on the Flash API, and your performance is just generally better, right? So we've actually have a comparison where somebody decided to do the exact same thing in both APIs. Okay, so this is the Flash version. That loaded really fast. Let me find the JavaScript version. There we go. Okay, so then we have the AJAX API version. So you can see that this actually takes visible time to load in, right? This isn't meant to have the effect of loading in country by country. It's simply the fact that it's so slow. So let's go back to the Flash again, reload that. Counting, 1, 2, done. So you can see like performance is better, and the cool thing is that in every browser this would be pretty much the exact same performance. The JavaScript API, it's going to vary across every browser. So it's much easier to do things like this map of the world and anything involving polys. All right, and then another cool thing about Flash is that it can actually make raw socket connections so that you can read continuous streams of data. And it can also read in binary data. So those are 2 things that JavaScript can't do natively. Apparently, Gears is working on being able to read in binary objects. But until then, and until everybody has Gears installed, we can use Flash. So here's a really cool example where somebody did collaborative chat rooms, taking advantage of the ability to stream in data fast. So I'm probably going to be the only one here. If anyone, who's online right now? All right, I'll IM this to you. We'll get somebody else in the room. Don't look, don't look. Yeah, are you there already? Yeah. Yeah, Gmaps. Let's do the Gmaps room. Okay. Let's see, are you joined? My resolution's all off. Okay. I'm gonna go to the whiteboard. Yeah, there you are. Okay, so can you see what I'm doing?
Yeah.
All right. Smiley face. Fisher. Hey, man. Did you erase? You erased, didn't you? If you press the eraser, erase everything.
Oh, okay.
Fisher. It sucks. Aww. So this is cool. Like, we're both able to use this map at the exact same time. And you could fake this in JavaScript using stuff like comment or whatever. But it's very easy to do this in Flash. I forgot the name of the server they're using, but it's something that Adobe provides to make stuff like this really easy. OK, Fisher, we're done now. And there's also somebody we met with that's really excited about the ability to load in binary objects, because they're going to be able to pass in like a lot more data over the wire. All right, so this is something kind of silly but kind of cool, and it actually gets asked for. Since our map in the Flash API is just a sprite, and since you can like rotate any sprites in Flash, then we can rotate the map. Which is basically next to impossible in JavaScript, because in JavaScript you'd have to actually rotate images on the page. So you'd have to use Canvas, VML, like S3, all that crazy stuff in order to do that. But it's super easy in the Flash API. So let's look at the example. Sometimes this is best viewed under the influence of something. So the cool thing is, like, so I can stop this. Ready? Let me go a little farther. And I can actually keep using the, I mean, this is just, it's fully functional. I can keep using it. And you may think this is kind of silly, but there's actually a lot of people who want to be able to rotate the map, because like sometimes when you're looking at an area, you think of that area as, you don't think of it the way like the world thinks of it, right? Because we're always oriented to north. You might think of think about your college campus. You probably have an idea of what's north in that campus, and it's probably not north, right? Because usually like you take something that's square and kind of think of it that way, you know? So there's times when you actually do want to be able to rotate a map, and you can do this in Flash. Do you have a question?
Yeah, is there planned support for rotating everything but the controls? Like keeping it actually square, but rotating the tiles on?
So the question is if there's planned support for being able to rotate everything but the controls. So no, but what you can do is this. You can create a map without any of the controls, and then just you could use like Flex UI components on top of that in order to, like that H slider that I showed earlier. I could easily like put this inside of a panel UI component and then have that horizontal slider above, and just use that to zoom in instead. So you would create a map without any controls and then manipulate it outside with some flex controls.
All the text will still be upside down.
That's true. So I mean, so he mentioned that the text will always be upside down. This is true because in Google Maps we bake all of our text into the tiles to have the most efficient performance for rendering the tiles. Because if you had to actually load in, like, at least in JavaScript, if you have to load in like text divs for all of the different cities that you see in any given time, you're loading like an awful lot of stuff into the browser. So we always render everything into the tiles. So ideally what you'd want to be able to do is have like a base tiles that didn't have any labels on it, and load in your own tooltips or labels based on some data that you had. We don't really export any of that data for people to use right now because of the data provider stuff. So that's a good point as well. So right now, the spinning map is probably more of a fun demo, something to do on Friday nights. Yeah. But maybe in the future when we offer more options for like tiles, it'll be more usable. Last reason is that Flash, there are places where Flash is allowed, like where Swifts are allowed to be embedded, where JavaScript is not allowed to be embedded. One of those examples is Google Earth. So Google Earth does allow you to embed Swifts in the info bubbles. So let's open this up. This is just a KML file. I'm just going to open up Earth. There it is. All right. And I think another example of another place you can embed it where you can embed JavaScript is MySpace, but now with Open Social, I'm not sure that's true anymore. But I think previously they had a limitation where you can only do Swift. All right. Yeah, click. OK, there we go. So click on the place mark. And you can see it's actually loaded in a little Flash Maps API inside the window.
You know Sydney was in the middle of the US?
Yeah, it is. I moved it. Hey, I can edit it right now. Ready? Quick KML for you guys. Just copy, paste this, fix it. All right, so where is Sydney, in fact? Do you know the latitude longitude? Because if you don't know the latitude longitude, we're not going to fix it. Huh. We'll just guess. So it's past the date line. It's very near the date line. Let's go for 175. And it's below the equator. Let's go for -30.
No, but you can't navigate San Jose. Are you really going to do this?
Hey now.
Oh wait, I got it.
Yeah?
Oh, except it's not in decimal.
Oh, I got pretty good. Where's? Look at that, dude. I'm like. No, that's New Zealand, which is commonly confused with Australia. So, that's pretty good. All right. So those are the reasons why you'd want to use Flash. 10 minutes. All right. So I'm going to just show some integrations of Flash with our other APIs. So the first one I want to show is integrating the Flash API with our AJAX APIs. Now, many people probably don't realize that you can actually access the results of our AJAX APIs just with an HTTP GET. So in the documentation, they call this the AJAX APIs for Flash and other non-JavaScript environments. You could think of alternative ways of thinking of that. But this is pretty cool. So you can do an HTTP GET to some URL, and you get back JSON results. And JSON's really cool because so many different, pretty much every language has its own module for reading in JSON and parsing it. So it's a great format to use. So here's some quick code in Flash to do a query to them. So we're using HTTP service, and so we can set some parameters. So this is the URL, and then this is some parameters that we're appending to the URL. So VQ, we're going to search for Paris Hilton. We want just the normal text format back, and then we're adding an event listener so that when the URL returns and loads correctly, we're going to go to this on-server response function, and then we just send it. So this looks a lot like an XML HP request, really. And then we have code here, which you can't really see. So we'll look at the actual documentation to see that code. Fonji. All right. So here's the Flash code. So then when we get the result back, we can just decode the text into JSON. And this is using an open source JSON parsing library. And it's hosted on code.google.com. So once we decode the get JSON, then we can access all the properties of it and use it however we want. All right, so here's an example where we're using the local search API. plus some flex components to enable users to search the map for businesses and other results. All right, so we'll actually look at the demo. I always search for Fox because that's my last name, and I think it's a really good search. Actually, sometimes I search for pizza. That's true. All right, so we got some results here. Basically just created some markers on the map, gave them some labels. Now let's look at the source for this. All right, so first we have some flex components, just the text box. I gave some options here and a button. And then we go down here. This is our HTTP service. So we're setting the query is equal to the text that they entered in that input box. We're asking for a large result size, so we get 8 results instead of 4. We're also setting a restriction type, which is kind of like, it's specific to local search, basically. And we're setting in the span and the latitude, longitude, which is the center of the map. Doing some special stuff there. You can ignore it. We're basically doing a site restrict as well. And then we're going to send the result. And then when it comes back, we decode the results into JSON, get the array of results from the JSON, and then we iterate through them. And then for each of them, we can get like the latitude, longitude, result.lat, result.street address, result.region, etc. So it's really easy to parse and use inside ActionScript. The cool thing about JSON is that it's basically the same thing as ActionScript object notation or AS3 object notation. I don't know if that exists, but it's a JSON. If you had JSON and you wanted to use it in ActionScript, all you'd have to do is copy and paste it into your ActionScript project, and then just give it a type of object, and then you're set. So it's the exact same. Since they're both based on ECMAScript, they use the exact same way of representing objects like this. So it's super easy to use in ActionScript. All right, then we can just create some markers, add them to the map. The next thing we want to do is use the AJAX Feeds API. So if you're not familiar with it, what the AJAX Feeds API will do is take in a URL to an RSS or an Atom feed, and it'll give you back the result of that URL as an array of entries, and then it'll kind of generalize. Because RSS and Atom feeds have different ways of representing like different information, like the summary and the content. So it'll generalize the results into a standard result format. So you always check title, updated content. So it's basically making it easy for you to use RSS and Atom feeds without having to worry about the particularities of what's the difference between RSS and Atom. So they generalize the results for you. So it's a cool API, and so we can use that from the HTTP service as well. And but because I want to load a GeoRSS feed, so a GeoRSS feed is an RSS feed that has some special geotags in it in order to specify the point of a particular item in an RSS feed. So because I need to get those extra tags, I actually need to use the mixed XML JSON response format, because that will give me back the generalized JSON, but then also just the raw XML for that feed. And I need that raw XML in this case in order to get the geo information out, right? So we're going to use the XML response, and then we're also going to use this open source XML parsing library or XML syndication library, which basically supports Atom, RSS, etc. So let me just show the demo. That might be kind of confusing. All right, so here what we're doing is we have this, it's a Flickr feed, and we're looking for things that are tagged with Geo and Paris. So we get back a bunch of results in Paris, surprisingly enough. And then we can click and see an image in the info window. So view source on this one's a little more complicated. So we have the standard flex components again. And then we're using the HTTP service. And this time we're saying the output, we want JSON XML. So this will give us back the JSON and the raw XML. And so then when we decode the JSON, we actually have to first decode the result into JSON, and then decode the JSON response data into an XML string. So we decode that into XML. And once we've decoded that, we use this Atom class. So this is talking about we have the open source XML syndication library. And so that has Atom classes, RSS classes, et cetera. So we can use, so we say, OK, we want new Atom 1.0. And we tell it to parse in this XML string. And then it lets us iterate through the entries. And we can look for entry.geo, entry.geo.point, and then create some stuff from it. So I actually ended up modifying this XML syndication library in order to support GeoRSS. So it didn't naturally. So if we look at the source, I think that's actually included in here. So you can see in the source, we have this Mxml, but then we also have all these other things. So we have the JSON serialization library, and then we have all these Atom, RSS, et cetera. So you can actually look and see what the Atom code looks like here. It's basically doing XML parsing, et cetera, and just building up this entry array. So this is, if you're doing Flash and you want to parse Atom or RSS or any variations of it, I recommend using this open source library and modifying it however you see fit. So it gives you a good starting point, at least. So in my case, I had to modify it to support GeoRSS. But it was cool that it had a lot of pre-existing classes that I needed. All right. So then after I did that, I enjoyed parsing XML so much that I decided to write a KML parser. So at least two of you know what KML is, and that's the Google Earth. Or basically, it's a language for defining geo files that are browsable by geo browsers, such as Google Earth. So it started with Google Earth, but now it's supported by Google Maps, Microsoft Virtual Earth, et cetera. Right? So KML is a very common format for people to represent their geo data in. So we immediately got questions in the group like, hey, how can I parse KML files? And the answer was, well, it's XML. You can parse it that way. But people wanted more of an example. So I decided to write a KML parsing library and do a little demo of that. And I based the KML parsing library on the XML syndication library that I'd used for the GeoRSS example. So here's the actual demo. This is using just using the sample, the KML sample of what's supposed to work in maps. So I support polygons, place marks, line string, ground overlay. Don't support screen overlays because we don't have those in the Flash API. So if we look at the source for this, the Mxml is really just creating the KML and creating the tree list. Really, the essence of this is in this library that I created here. And I based it off libkml, which is a C++ library for parsing KML. So you can see I've defined like all these different classes for different elements of KML, so coordinates, document, feature, folder, geometry. And really all they're doing is just, let's look at an example. They're just using the E4X XML parsing. So you can see here, I'm just looking for the lat long box element in that KML feature. Let's look at linear ring. Yeah, let's look for something that actually has feature. All right. So here, like I'm getting the description by checking for the description element, snippet, KML name, looking for an Atom link as well. So I was able to take advantage of the Atom classes I'd already used since KML uses Atom for its attribution. So create an Atom link, do some other stuff. So yeah, that's an example of, it's really easy to use E4X to parse different types of XML. So I recommend if you want to do that, just to base it on the open source libraries that are already available and modify it for whatever particular XML format you're using. So final example is just using Flash with PHP MySQL. So here we're basically going to do exactly what we do in the JavaScript API. What we recommend is that you use PHP to output XML based on your MySQL table, and then parse that XML into your map. So that's what this is doing. I actually followed the majority of my JavaScript tutorial, and then at the very end just made the Flash version to display the XML. So here we're sending off a URL request, and this is actually running live on my server. And that's generating the XML. And when the XML comes in, I'm just parsing it. So you can see I'm looking for all the marker elements, iterating through them, and getting attributes. So marker.atName, that's the attribute, address, type, lat, long, etc., and creating the marker on the map. So that's a very simple XML parsing example, but it works. All right, so yeah, that's pretty much everything. Any questions? Yeah.
Is that XPath syntax? It's not, right? What is it?
So this is E for X, and I think it's similar to XPath, but not exactly the same. So you can look up E for X. Let's see. I think it's similar to XPath, but I don't think it's exactly the same. And yeah, so it should be. So the Actionscript 3 supports it, but I think the plan is for JavaScript to support it soon. It's pretty cool. It's basically, you can do the traditional style XML parsing, like get elements by tag name, get attribute. You can still do that. But when I actually did that and posted a sample that did that, somebody, a Flex developer in the group was like, hey, why aren't you using E for X? I was like, whoa, OK. So the cool thing to do is to use the E for X style parsing. And that's like the modern style of XML parsing. And it's nice because it's pretty compact to write as well. It's faster to get elements.
With Flex, the compile the Swift file is typically a little larger. I mean, what kind of typical size do you get?
What kind of size do you get?
Yeah.
I don't usually look at the sizes, but we can just check some of my.
Even the hello ones.
Yeah, and we can just look in the Flex Builder and see. So the question is about size. What kind of size we get. So we can look at the one that we compiled today. And the Swift is 286 kilobytes. Now, the way the Maps API for Flash works is that we actually dynamically load in the Maps API when the Swift loads. So that 286 KB doesn't include the Maps API for Flash. At the minimal, it just includes like our interfaces, right? So this is kind of a technique that we came up with because then we can actually push updates live. We can push bug fixes live to people without them having to recompile against a new SWIC. So the way our versioning works is that if it's a new feature, like a new function or class, you'll need to go and download a new SWIC and compile against it so that like it knows about it and knows it exists. But if it's just a bug fix, you can actually wait for that version to become the default version, right? Once we're sure that like it doesn't have any new bugs in it, or you can just pass in version equals 1.5 through your flash bars, and that'll force that version to dynamically load in. So that's pretty cool, and it's a system that the Flash engineers came up with for being able to push bug fixes without requiring people to recompile. Right now, people are generally recompiling because we're actually launching lots of like new features. But when we stop doing that, which is when we start to stabilize more, it'll be mostly bug fixes that people want. So, okay. Good. So you gonna go make a Flash map? I think I really recommend using Flex and Actionscript 3. It's just really pleasing. I know this is like betraying JavaScript and stuff, but Actionscript 3 is just really like clean, and the ability to use like all these components just off the bat is really nice. I know I could go and use like a library like Subtractulus and use a component in there, but it's really cool when it's just part of the like if HTML came with a tree list by default, that's what it's like, and it's just cool to be able to do that. And it's nice also because it creates kind of a common user interface across a lot of people's Flex projects. So when I come to somebody else's Flex app, I immediately know how to use it because I'm used to the components there too. So I recommend it. I think it's fun. All right, I'm done.